What's up, guys? This is now episode 4 of the bodybuilding educational series that I've been doing. We're going to kind of open it up today, and what I thought and what I want to share with you guys is I want to make sure that there's value. You guys feel valued when you ask questions, I answer them. So the last episode that we did, we got a significant amount of questions in the comment section. They're not all on the same topic, so we're going to continue our topicked out series, but I just want to take this time to basically, do an Ask Me Anything. You guys can, or as these questions come in, we're going to go through them today, just jump right into this, but hopefully this will be beneficial to you. So just to clear it up, this is not a specific topic, but hopefully I can keep you guys entertained as you guys go through this. And if you asked a question in the last episode, it's going to be answered today.
Colby Crawley said, is there a recommended ratio of massing time compared to fat loss time in a year, such as 70% spent in massing, 30% spent in cutting?
Okay, so this is a good question. And before I even jump into it, I don't think this is a one-size-fits-all question. I think that for a lot of people, you can get there a lot of different ways. For example, myself, when I was competing, I really would spend the greater amount of 16 to 18 months in a surplus. I wouldn't do a cut during that time. I wouldn't resensitize. I would get pretty soft. But what I was able to do is by taking that 16 to 18 months of a growth phase, I was able to put on significant tissue every time. And basically from 2015 through 2018, I was able to jump a class every year by doing this. So that being said, was it the most insulin sensitivity, keeping my insulin sensitivity super high? Probably not, but I found it successful for me. That being said, I truly do think that if you can keep your insulin sensitivity in a positive place, meaning that your body's ability to uptake carbohydrates still remains positive, so things you can look at, are you still getting good pumps in the gym? Ergogenic aids aside, are you still getting a response in the gym that you got when you initially came into your off-season phase, or does it take you 45 minutes to get a pump? Things like that. That's going to kind of be one way to tell, how your body's partitioning nutrients. Just looking in the mirror, is your, waistband, are you starting to get indentations in your waistband, in your boxers, things like that. So keeping that positive balance, I think, is an important thing. But what I would try to do is not have this yo-yo of going into a surplus and then deficit and surplus and deficit. The more time you can spend in a surplus while keeping your body fat percentage lower, the more ability your body's going to have in that environment to add lean tissue. So I really don't want to throw like a number like 70% of the year being a surplus, 30% being a deficit. Really, the best way I could say it is do your best to keep your insulin sensitivity high while keeping yourself in a surplus throughout, and doing that for however long you need to maintain and grow new tissue. And then, like I said in the last episode, to make sure you actually allow a period on the back end of growing to basically allow that progress to marinate and hold and quantify into solidified tissue before you go back into a diet.
How does one know when they're ready for their first show beyond the desire or want to do so? The training age? A certain amount of muscle to be competitive. So
I think this is a question that we are all going to ask ourselves at some point, and that is, when am I going to be ready to compete? And the answer is there's no time that I would say, outside of a very few genetically blessed people, like the ideal picture of what you have in your head of what you want to one day look like and where you're at now. I would say getting there is going to require you to continue to step on stage, or at least get to sub 10% body fat several times in order to get to your ultimate goal. Realistically, guys, there's so much benefit that comes from having stage time, gaining stage experience, going through a diet, seeing what that looks like on your body, seeing how that feels mentally, physically, emotionally for yourself. And not only that too, but also, and I've mentioned this before, getting rid of the baby fat that maybe we've never gotten rid of. A lot of us might have grown up as athletes. That baby fat is positive. It does a lot for us performance metrics wise on a ball field, in middle school and high school. But to be in truly cosmetic shape, that needs to be gone. And maybe for a lot of us, we've never gotten rid of it since we were a child. So getting there and quantifying and seeing what that actually looks like. But there's also so much benefit to be had to actually reaching those super low levels of body fat, and then the rebound effect that you can get following that, so you might not have the image, or the image in your head and where you're at right now might not be the same in the same spot, but going through that process of dieting down, going through preps, maturing through that, there's a lot of benefit there to reach your ultimate goal of what that might look like for you, and again, if you have somewhat of a solid training, strength base built, I would go through this process to therefore one, see if you even really like it, make sure you like it before you continue, or you give yourself a lot of time to going through the process, but make sure that it's something that you like and enjoy. And then there is so many benefits that are going to come from it. So is there a time where it's like, yeah, this is when you should compete? No, I can't give you that answer, but what I will say is that there's so much benefit from going through that process, and you're going to mature through that, both as a physique and also emotionally and mentally, that it is going to help you to go through it in order to reach your ultimate goal or ultimate vision of what you want to see on stage.
Someone asked, low calories on rest days during off season? ?
Okay, this is a great question. I think for off season specifically, and I'll kind of touch on a contest prep as well. For off season specifically, a lot of my athletes, I do have them, and I want to rephrase the question. I have them consuming more calories on their training day than I do their off day, but I wouldn't put their off day calories in the context of being low calories. So I usually, around the training window, prior to training, intra-training, post-training, I usually put more calories there. I also usually put more calories at their meal one on their training day. And then on their off day, I reduce those calories down to their baseline needs, and not their baseline for maintenance, but their baseline to support growth. And really what I think this question comes down to is your days off are your days to recover and to repair, okay? So I wouldn't want to put the body into too much of a deficit where the deficit created by the diet is then holding your body back from being able to repair. So that's a key point. Now, during a prep, especially when you know that you are for sure in a deficit, I actually do not like to reduce calories down any further on an off day versus a training day. So at peak calories in their off season, yes, I would say the calories on a training day are higher, but again, not overly pulled back on an off day. And then as you go into a contest prep, I will kind of keep that cadence the same until I reach a certain point where I know that fatigue is starting to drive up, whether it's showing in their training, whether it's just, other environmental factors that are happening in terms of sleep feedback or just food satiety throughout the day, hunger, hormone, responses, things like that. And at that point, I'll then create an equal diet where their calories are the same on their off day as well as their training day. Now, granted, there might be some cases where you need to really push for that final mark of conditioning. I would say for me as a coach, the final mark of conditioning where I kind of throw caution to the side, for lack of a better word, is the last 4 weeks where it's let's do whatever we have to do to get the job done. So at that point, I then might make further decreases on their off days, but more often than not, as often as I can, I really view that off day as a recovery day, and I don't want to overpull calories on that day to then hinder their ability to recover.
Jordan Reeves asked, what are your guys' thoughts on someone who's very tattooed and wants to compete in bodybuilding? Do you think it'll be too damaging on the athlete's potential?
So my honest answer to this is if your tattoos are covering up origin and insertions of muscle, and it's just overly covering, let's say your quads, your back fully, if you have a full back tattoo, that is going to hinder your ability to present your body to its fullest potential on stage 100%, in my opinion.
I wish this person's name was actually on here because this is really cool, but they said, hey, Matt, I've lost 150 pounds over the past 16 to 17 months, 333 pounds down to 183 pounds. I've been in my first slight surplus since the end of the cut, but I'm curious what route, diet phase I should continue in after that.
First off, congrats on what you've done on your own. That's awesome. As far as your question, I honestly would need more information to know which direction you should head from here. But with the amount that you've lost, I would assume to some degree there's been a performance drop off through that as well. So what I would work to do is actually drive calories up to be in a maintenance phase or slightly above maintenance to then drive performance back up. And if you still have body fat that you still want to get off, I would assume maybe more so loose skin. But I would do that in incremental phases. So go into a maintenance phase, go slightly above maintenance, allow your body to get stronger. And then from there, if you want to continue to tighten your skin over time, then go back into a dieting phase just strictly to pull that skin in tighter. But I wouldn't just continue to chronically diet until that happens, because you're going to start to feel more fatigue. You're going to start to feel more hormonal issues. Obviously, performance being a huge determining factor of how you're feeling in the gym, your motivation to train. All those things are going to kind of be revitalized if you go slightly above baseline calories or your maintenance calories. So I would hang out there for a while, start to implement some refeed days, which can be fully calculated. And I can do a full episode on refeeds and what that looks like for me, but just ways to then prime your metabolism to keep going rather than down regulating during a dieting phase. Those things are all important for long-term, but really, again, to answer this question, I would need more of the variables of what you're currently doing in order to help you answer that.
Drew Cornett asked, obviously there are many factors when it comes to prepping, but when you're scheduling things like refeeds, about how often do you do them? Weekly, monthly?
Okay, so the honest answer is, in terms of refeed frequency, I ideally like to do them as often as your body allows. Sorry, I didn't mean to bump that. So again, that's different based off of the individual, but I really like to get your body in somewhat of a cadence, whether that be every 5 days, whether that be every week, where you're giving the body nutrients to continue to prolong. Because what a refeed day looks like for me is a day to continue to sustain your baseline diet without having to continue to make corrective pulls from that baseline diet or add in energy expenditure via cardio. So it takes both working in unison with each other in order to continue to create a long-term sustainable plan during a fat loss phase. Because for a lot of people, if all you do is you pull calories, and then once you stall out, you pull more calories, and then once you stall out, you pull more calories, and you add more cardio, the body's going to become very resistant to that. But what can actually help the body become resistant to that is by adding in a higher amount of calories, whether, starting out maybe every 10 days, every 7 days, every 6 days, to keep your body operating at a higher level, even though the baseline needs or nutrients have been pulled down. So that way, metabolically speaking, you're still operating here as the calories are pulled lower to continue to be able to sustain, that diet period longer. Because ideally, a successful diet to me and successful contest prep is making the least amount of changes needed to your baseline diet. And that's going to be helped by what you're doing and how often you're bringing in refeeds. Now, again, a refeed isn't an excuse to be lazy. It's definitely done out of need, out of necessity. And what this looks like structure-wise is I will try to bring in, let's just say for ballpark numbers, I will basically double somebody's carbs or maybe triple somebody's carbs to start. And the way that you can learn if that is a successful amount of food or not is basically, let's take their baseline weight. Let's say their baseline weight is 185 pounds. You give them a refeed day and they jump up to 188 pounds, totally acceptable. But how long from that 188 to the 185 does it take them to get back down to baseline? Are they returning a bit to baseline in a day? Is it taking them 4 days? Is it taking them 7 days? And then based off of how long they return to baseline, that should kind of tell you the cadence or frequency of the refeed. So using that same example, if they started off at 185 and they jumped to 188, and then the day following their refeed, they jumped back down to 185, I would argue to say that they could probably handle more food, fats and carbs in their refeed day. If it took them 3 days to get back down to 185, I would say they're in a perfect spot, because then what you have is you have 3 days of basically holding weight, allowing performance to sustain and maintain, and then you go back into 4 days of fat loss. So on a 7-day cadence, you have 3 days of maintenance and you have 4 days of fat loss every week, and then on that 7th day you then refeed again. Now, another example is if you feed somebody and they hit 188 and it takes them 6 to 7 days to get back to baseline, that can mean that you're either starting the refeeds too early in the process and they're not a need yet, they're not a necessity, the body's not in as much of a deficit as needed to be, and or you might have just fed them too much. I would say the ideal sweet spot is that they return to baseline within 3 to 4 days. Any sooner than that, more times than not, you're not feeding them enough, Any later than that, that's just going to prolong fat loss too much, or that you overfed them. So that sweet spot to me is in that 3 to 4 day window.
Brian Tompkins asked, I've heard you recommend about 6 to 8 hard sets per body part for more advanced bodybuilders. Do you recommend more sets for beginner/intermediates?
Yes, I would recommend more sets for beginners and intermediates. And the reason why is because you need more practice. And your ability to hit and execute at a super high intensity level, meaning load on the bar, isn't as great as it is for somebody that's more advanced. So somebody that's more advanced can really drive a high amount of fatigue with a low amount of volume because they're so in tune with how their body works and the execution pattern itself that they can really fully drive that to failure. Whereas a less mature, younger lifter, they're going to have more thoughts of doubt in their head. They're going to have more, questioning their ability to execute. Their brain might shut off prematurely because of, just unawareness about what that load feels like, especially at that end of the range. So, just like with anything, whether it's free throws, whether it's running patterns, whether you're a football player, whether it's throwing pitches in a strike zone, the earlier you are in your development, you need more practice. It's a skill. Lifting weight is a skill. We're not Olympic lifters, but even for bodybuilders, I believe that execution is the first thing you need to work on. And then once you have your execution honed in on, that's when you really drive the effort. But in order for execution or the effort to be there, you have to have execution in play first. So yes, for younger lifters, I would encourage less overall sets to failure, more volume close to failure. And then for the more advanced lifter, I would reduce that volume down because your ability to actually achieve true failure is truly there.
What does Matt think about training splits with training age? I know it's been said that guys like Jordan Peters that say for beginners to start at a full body split for 1 year, then upper lower split for 2 to 3 years, then into a push-pull legs for 2 to 3 years. After that, you can start changing splits into a specialized split. Where do you start someone based on their age? For example, an 18-year-old novice versus, let's say, someone who has experience training in Olympic lifting or powerlifting, but never trained bodybuilding at 28 years old. Two different scenarios. What split would both of those situations require or training differences be?
Okay, so I think basically what this question is getting at, and we're going to break it down for you, but I just didn't want to miss any part of this. So specificity within training related to training age, starting out super basic, getting the most out of the least, so to speak, starting out somebody with a full body split where they're hitting, let's say, upper and lower 3 times a week, and then going into an upper lower split where you might be having 2 upper sessions a week, 2 lower sessions a week, and then going into push pull legs. I think that is an awesome way to train. From a developmental standpoint, I think it's really, really good. Again, as you are working on your skill development, this is a huge part of it. Hitting those movements more frequently is going to help you develop those skills. So I think starting off somebody that's super young with a full body split, or not young training age. I don't mean a 7-year-old, but I mean a young training age where they can hit those movements more frequently. That's just only going to benefit them. And then as they improve there, and as I just talked about in terms of peak strength and how peak strength is greater for somebody that is more advanced, you want to then be able to continue to prolong that for as long as possible. All right. So I think that's a really super foundational way, great way to get programming started. What I do want to say though, and what I think is really important, is that somebody's adherence to the plan, regardless of how great the plan is, their adherence is what matters most, and then also that they're excited to go into the gym. All right, so I'm never going to be somebody that encourages just this random exercise selection or constantly the plan is changing, because then the skills within those movement patterns, you're always having to relearn them. So rather than advancing beyond, just the basic knowledge or the basic execution, you're just having to relearn motor patterns all the time rather than improve in them. That being said, adherence to the plan and being excited and being motivated to train, I think, is important. And also I spoke about this on the last episode. A lot of bodybuilding, we are influenced as bodybuilders by what the guys we look up to are doing. So a lot of these bodybuilders are training on a bodybuilding split, on a body part split. That doesn't mean that you should get every beginner on a body part split, but also finding ways for them to find enjoyment in what they're doing is important. Granted, if it was just about like militant execution, I would say for sure that the way that this person is asking this question, where the first year, the first 18 months, something else too, I wouldn't get caught up in these timeline boxes. What I would try to really do is maximize each individual training routine before you move on to the next, as long as boredom doesn't set in, or as long as injury doesn't set in, things of that nature. So really try to maximize that full body split for as long as you possibly can. Once you've maximized that, and Matt, what do you mean by maximizing? Like, drive progress as much as you can out of that. Be obsessive about the progress you can drive out of that. And then once you might need, a reason to change to an upper lower split might be like, Matt, like, I'm really starting to get stronger within these movements. I might need more recovery. That might then, encourage us to go to an upper lower. And again, the driver of progress might then encourage us to add an additional day of rest and then go to a push-pull legs, all right? Some of the best progress I've ever had was doing a push-pull legs and resting on the front and back end of me training legs. So let's start off the week like this. First day of the week would be off. Second day of the week would be legs. Third day of the week would be off. Fourth day of the week would be pull. Fifth day of the week would be push. Sixth day of the week would be off, and then I would resume legs again, because that allowed the most amount of recovery to be around the body parts where I was driving and demanding the most out of during that time. So really thinking about things in a few ways, what your adherence and excitement can be, looking at recovery when it comes to how quickly you change from, let's say, a full body to upper lower to push pull legs. Those two things I think are really important. And then not being like in this box of, I can only stick to this for a year, I can only stick to this for 2 years. Really look at it as how quickly are you progressing or lack thereof, and then how much recovery does your body need in order to continue to drive that progress. So the next part of this question is,
after that, you can start changing splits into specialized splits.
Yeah, so then it goes to specialized splits. And really for specialized splits, more often than not, guys, I would really reserve these for the guys that are at the top of the sport. And what I mean by that is top 10 in the world Olympians. I think a lot of us could continue to drive a lot of performance and a lot of physique change out of a push-pull legs or out of a set standardized bodybuilding split without any specificity from the start. Now, granted, if you have an extreme lagging body part, if your upper body's huge and you have no sweep to your legs, and obviously you need to address your legs a little bit more, but I would often argue that the addressing of those legs needs to come down more to your execution within movements, making sure you're going through a full range of motion, and then your effort once the execution is dialed in, more so than the set split specificity that you have at that time. But I often think that we get caught up in the minutia of these specialized splits way before we have the muscularity to support them. For example, Nick Walker needs a specialized split. To some extent, he doesn't even really. But these guys that are the greatest in the world trying to then close the gap of maybe 1 spot or 2 spots or 3 spots, that's who I would really then specialize things for, more so than if you're trying to win nationals or if you're trying to get top 5 at a qualifier. At that point, I really think it comes down to being locked into a specific plan. And again, it follows us throughout time of making sure that your execution's on point and then truly trying to maximize effort within given movements once the execution's there. Yeah, so the next part of this question is asking, like, if you have somebody that's just as green as it can be to bodybuilding versus somebody who's been or who has trained and has experience in Olympic lifting or powerlifting, well, really, what's the difference? It's going to be the amount of muscle tissue these two people hold. I could argue, we could argue so many things, and that's the beauty of bodybuilding, is that there's no absolutes in bodybuilding other than that you need to recover, you need to eat, and you need to train. That's about it. But I would argue that there could be a little bit more specificity to the person that's carrying the muscle than the absolute beginner. But really, in a lot of ways, these people are all the same. If neither have ever focused on hypertrophy, then they are kind of in the same camp. That being said, the person that's been a powerlifter probably has developed a back, hamstrings, glutes, so it really all comes down to the specific need. But I think the overarching theme of this goes back to my last point, that I really think that we need to drive specificity to the best in the world, and then those that have serious lagging issues, whether it be like a bilateral issue, right side to left side, or something, an injury that they're trying to bring back up. Obviously, that's a specific case, but I think a lot more bodybuilders could benefit from just being locked into a specific rep scheme, programming structure, set split, rather than always trying to, reinvent the wheel or go to this specialized split before it's truly their time to do so. The rest of the questions from this episode really pertain to off season, which is going to be our next topic that we go over. So I'll make sure to go over those more in depth. But again, guys, I appreciate the support on this. Hopefully this is a help to you. That's all this is meant to be, is just a help. So hopefully the goal of that is being achieved, and continue just to give us feedback in the comments, continue to write your questions in the comments, and we'll make sure to address them as well. But I hope you guys are having a great day, and we will see you next time.